feel like the room is beginning to settle down. Is that the correct estimation? Settle down, settle down. Okay, well, I just want to say it's so fun to see so many people I know here tonight. This is such a treat. The pressure is so much lower now. We're going to get a very crappy show. Okay, well, welcome everybody to Ghost Stories, Tales of Glory, and the Invention of Christmas! I'm so glad to have you here. If you've been to one of our events before, you'll know that how this usually goes is I say, hi everyone, welcome to this event. Everyone cheers like you just did so beautifully. Then I say, my name is Charity, I'm the book curator here at Artifacts of History. The night is going to be divided into two different sections. There will be an intermission between them. The first part will be primarily edutainment. The second half should be primarily entertainment. We'll see how that goes. Just so you know, both parts are going to be about 20 minutes to 20 minutes to a half hour long, with the intermission being about 10-ish minutes between. Okay. You're also free to ask questions at any point. There will be a point designated for questions, thus if you want to say them for then, that is perfectly all right. Okay. And without further ado, let us begin. Another commonality between these little presentations that I do is there's usually some kind of overarching thesis. And this one is no exception. This one actually is kind of two-pronged. The first part of the thesis is that the stories that we're going to be talking about tonight, so that's Christmas movies, books, songs, are of course interesting on their own. But I also want to put forth the idea that their backstories and their legacies are just as interesting. The second part of the thesis is that these stories should also be so recognizable that if I were to flash an icon onto the screen that represents one, you would get it like instantly. We're going to begin testing that second part of my thesis now. So how this is going to go is we're going to go through a few different eras, and when we get to each one, like I said, I will flash an icon onto the screen, and you are going to shout out what it is as soon as you think you get it. I know there might be some hesitation. You're like, oh no, I'm not here to participate. Well, yes, you are. We're going to be doing this shout right now with a little practice, all right? So repeat after me. Ah! 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 Partridge in a tree. From the song 12 Days of Christmas. The Christmas classic, Partridge in a Pear Tree. Yes, well done, because not creature was. Yeah, this house was stirring. This one was. So the participatory element is not quite over yet until we get to the next era, because if you've also been to one of our events before, you might know that we sometimes take the choose your own adventure route. We're not going to talk about every one of these, there's not time for that. So what I'm going to ask now is that you choose which avenue you'd like to go down. Do you want to talk about the origins and legacies of 12 Days of Christmas, the 1816 Nutcracker short story, not the ballet, that's in a later era, or the Night Before Christmas?
Pear tree.
Pear tree.
Pear tree.
Pear tree?
Oh, well,
Is it nice? Okay. So, just need to find this mouse is also stirring. Okay. Welcome everyone to the 12 Days of Christmas mini lecture. Jazzercise period, you got it. There's a little cameo. Okay, so first things first. Most of the time we're going to be talking about the song and not the origins of the 12 days themselves. But if you do want to know more about them, first there is a QR code that will lead you to an English heritage site, which is kind of it's a nice little bite-sized look into the history of the 12 days. But for a really, really quick history, 12 days are just this old Christmas tradition, Christian tradition, where starting on Christmas Eve, that's the first day of Christmas, all the way until January 5th, which is Epiphany, the day that the wise men came in the Bible to the Christ child. And so all of the days in between are different feasts and festivals and celebrations. Like Feast of Stephen, which is what the good king once celebrates. Well, again, we're not here to talk too much about this. So we're going to talk about this banger here, the 12 Days of Christmas song, which is old. It's a folk song, so much older than 1780, although not as old as the original 12 Days tradition. But 1780 was the first, dated time that it appeared in print in this little book here, Mirth Without Mischief, which contains such classics as the 12 Days of Christmas, and also the delightful play of the gaping, wide-mouthed, waddling frogs who amuse good children and exercise their memory. Which could warrant its own presentation, so we're not even going to touch it for now. So here it is. Here's the song as it appeared in its entirety for the first time in 1780. There are three main things that I want to talk about about this page. The first is, what is even that? The second is, so for real, it's like the scariest and the funniest thing I've ever seen all at the same time. The second is, if you're an eagle-eyed viewer, you might notice that the order of the gifts is not quite the same as what we sing today. This is the order that we sing. Do you want to see that again?
Please.
If you're especially eagle-eyed, if you're an eagle with contact lenses, then you might notice that one of the gifts is just not entirely different, but a little bit different than what we sing, and that is, yes, collie birds. And I know what you're thinking, Charity, what are collie birds? How am I supposed to know what to give on the fourth day of Christmas if I don't know what collie birds are? And a collie bird is just a blackbird. But this lyric proved to be tricky for a lot of people through the centuries. Here we have a few alternative lyrics. People just going, I don't know, 4 curly birds, 4 colored birds, 4 canary birds, 4 collie dogs? I just don't know. Which leads, of course, to a lot of different variations of lyrics through the centuries. I think there's some really golden ones on here, and I just want you to take a moment and look at the list of the song as it could have been, and think, what would I prefer to have had? Would I prefer to have 10 men mowing, 10 lads a looping? I don't know. Anyway, the song as we know it, with the lyrics and the music, was established in 1909 when Frederick Austin published the words with the tune that we still sing. So there we go. There's a little bite-sized history of the 12 Days of Christmas. But I know that there are some things still unresolved. Like, why is the song the way that it is? Which is a fair question. It's kind of weird. For instance, why is it so long and repetitive? We can't know for sure, again, because this is a folk song, and so folk songs just kind of have a little bit of a muddy history. But the most likely answer is that it's a memory and forfeits game, which means that if you're playing it in a circle, and if you miss a word or if you miss a lyric, then you forfeit, which traditionally would look like giving the person next to you a kiss or a punch in the face. We're going to try this right now, okay, ready? And then the second question is, why are the gifts so strange? One possibility from the Oxford Dictionary of Nursery Rhymes, which you didn't know was a thing, did you? Says that the gifts maybe represent every month of the year. So, like in January, you're supposed to eat partridge and also pears. In April, the 4th month, you're supposed to eat collie dogs. I don't know. Another theory by this guy, Dr. Edward Finney, is that these gifts are all, so my true love gave to me, gifts given to a woman before her wedding. Christmas season historically is a time where weddings happen. Still happens in Provo because that's the time between semesters. So yes, there you go. All of your questions now resolved about 12 days of Christmas. So let us now move on, unless we have any questions. Okay, so you remember the rules of this game, right? picture comes on the screen and you go, it's this thing. Okay, are we ready? Nutcracker.
Oh, the gift of the
Yes.
Magi.
Well done. Well done. You got a gold star. So, which avenue do we want to put
The
in?
Nutcracker.
Okay. So I'll give everyone to the Nutcracker. All right. So our story begins in 1816 when a Prussian fellow named E.T.A. Hoffmann wrote the story The Nutcracker and the Mouse King. In 1844, it was rewritten, and not just translated, but rewritten by the French writer Alexander Dumas, who softened a lot of its edges. And then in the 1890s, we get the Russian composer Tchaikovsky rewriting it through music. What kind of happens is this big long game of telephone where the story kind of undergoes a lot of different changes until it gets to Tchaikovsky. But we must wonder, of course, why it got to Tchaikovsky at all, and that occurred when our friend Ivan Alexander, who was the director of the theaters in St. Petersburg, got together with his friend Marius, who was the best choreographer in all the land, and he was like, okay, Marius, so you know how the French are really good at spectacle and lavish ballets? I want to do one just like that. And Marius, who is French, was like, oui, oui. And so, well, who are we going to get to do the music? Because we want spectacle, we want drama. And so they decided they're going to turn to their old friend, whom they worked with the year before on the production Sleeping Beauty, because no one, and I say no one, does drama like Tchaikovsky does. I mean, just listen to that score. You want to do this? Watch me do this for hours. Unfortunately, Tchaikovsky thought it was a crappy idea. He didn't like the original source material for the Nutcracker. He thought it was boring and thematically not as interesting as Sleeping Beauty, for instance. And he also just thought that his own score was bad. He was like, this is the Nutcracker, if you will. But he does it anyway. And I'm going to turn it now over to my friend Deems Taylor to explain kind of how this went down when the Nutcracker was first performed and in the decades since. And he's a little bit quiet. I need you to get your listening ears on.
You know, it's funny how wrong an artist can be about his own work. Now, the one composition of Tchaikovsky's that he really detested was his Nutcracker suite, which is probably the most popular thing he ever wrote. It's a series of dancers taken from a full-length ballet called The Nutcracker, and was once composed in the St. Petersburg Opera House. It wasn't that much of a success, and nobody performs it nowadays, but I'm pretty sure you'll recognize the music of the suite when you hear it. Incidentally, you won't see any Nutcracker on the screen. There's nothing left of him in the title.
So I don't know how well you could hear that, but the part that I want to focus on is when he says it wasn't much of a success and nobody performs it nowadays, because Tchaikovsky's hunch about it initially proved correct, that it wasn't very good. A lot of critics were unimpressed, mostly with the staging of the ballet, but also some were impressed with Tchaikovsky's score, and so it was a flop when it was first performed in 1893 or 4. I should have checked that. But the other part of this sentence, which I think is really interesting, is when he says nobody performs it nowadays. So Fantasia, which is the movie that clip came from, was released in 1940. The Nutcracker didn't leave Russia to be performed until the year 1934. It was taken to England, and it wasn't taken to the United States until 1944. It's actually doing its 80th anniversary, American anniversary this year, which is kind of fun. But even then, it was still kind of spottily performed, wasn't the massive success, the big Christmas staple that we know and love today, until George Balanchine came along. So, George Balanchine actually grew up in Russia and performed in the Nutcracker as the Prince in the year 1919. And when he came to work with the New York City Ballet, he decided that he was going to revamp this production, make it the lavish spectacle that it was originally supposed to be. And so he did this by implementing kind of lost pieces of the original Hoffmann story, like the Mouse King having 7 heads, or the girl being called Marie instead of Clara, and also just made it a visual. I mean, the second half of it is the land of sweets, and so he made it just this visual, eye-popping, kind of sweet, lustrous candy kind of experience, which we'll get to in just a second. So he puts it on in 1954, although even then it's still not a huge success, and it won't be until a few years later when CBS comes along and they decide to air an abridged version of it. This is the best part. Anyway, so as you can see, well, maybe as you can't see, it's a little bit blurry. It was 1958. It's bright and it's popping and it's fun. And something notable about this dance in particular is that in traditional productions of the Nutcracker, this dance is done in this kind of darker Russian garb. And so it's this production where they become candy canes. The costumes for this were designed by a woman called Barbara Prince-Sarah. And Invention attributed a lot of his success in this production, but others to what she would dress her dancers, his dancers in. Here are some of her concept sketches from the original. If you want to take a look at these sketches as well as some other original photographs and things, the New York Public Library has an online exhibition. There's a QR code there. But as you can see, I mean, she delivers, right? Beautiful colors. They do really pop. They're not too showy, but they're just vibrant enough. And so she's artistically gifted, but she's also a technical genius. One thing that she does is she actually invents a new kind of tutu called a powder puff tutu. And this basically was just a tutu that could be held up without wires, which means that the dancers could move more freely, and the look was much lighter too. So I mean, there are a few different things that contribute to Balanchine's success. Part of it, is the advent of television. More people are seeing it than they've ever seen before. But part of it is just the look of it. It is kind of brought back to life. And of course, we can't go wrong with Tchaikovsky's original score. We'll just listen to a little bit. Oh my gosh, I forgot my dad hates pliés, so we're gonna move past this. I'm so sorry, Dad, I'm so sorry. Anyway, everyone, welcome to the next era. So this is gonna be a little bit trickier, and I'll give you a little hint for the next one. I'm not looking for the movie that it comes from in particular, but the song that's playing in this scene. Okay, we'll see if you can get it. Oh, Hark the Herald. No. White Christmas. Yes, White Christmas. Well done. This is from Holiday in 1942. These are the ding, 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 ding. All right.
George Bailey.
Right.
It's a Wonderful Life.
Okay. And this one? 34th Street. Well done. Well done. Okay, so which avenue do we want to go down? Okay. It's a trick question. They all lead to It's a Wonderful Life because that's what I want to talk about. So let's begin with the question. Does anybody know what this is? What this constellation is called?
It looks like nothing.
True. Someone said triangle yesterday too. Yeah. This is the constellation Capricorn. I bring this up. What? Okay.
I thought that, and I was like, that's weird.
Go with your gut, When it comes to constellations, always go with your gut. Never forget that. So the reason I bring this up is that when It's a Wonderful Life was released in 1946, it was dubbed by a lot of viewers as Capricorn. This was because it was directed by Frank Capra and they thought that it was really corny. Frank Capra did not think so. He thought that It's a Wonderful Life summed up his philosophy of filmmaking, you know, the individual and all of his integrity prevailing in the end against the forces of evil. But not everyone agreed with him. It got a lot of mixed reviews and was a box office flop. And again, this was because of the Capricorn thing, the sentimentality of it. They thought it was so sentimental, so sappy, it just wasn't realistic anymore. Another issue that a smaller group of people had with it was that it villainized capitalists a little too much. And so in 1947, the FBI issued a memo warning that this film was communist propaganda. Which I don't really buy into, but I do want to take this moment to just point out that there are some striking similarities between these two figures here. We'll just leave it at that because we need to jump up to 1974. 1974 is one of the saddest, but also one of the most fortuitous years in It's a Wonderful Life's history. What happened was, on the day that the film's copyright was supposed to be renewed, someone just forgot to do it. Like, the day just passed by, and it never crossed anyone's mind. Which meant that by Christmas of this year, television networks were looking at it going, oh my gosh, there's a Christmas movie that's out of copyright, we can just broadcast this for free. So everyone does, and it's just saturated, just flooding the television stations at this time, and it's at this point when it becomes a Christmas classic. You can't get away from it. But another reason for this is that this is 1974, remember? So it's now been almost 30 years since, you're welcome. It's been almost 30 years since the film's original release, which means that we're now 30 years removed from the setting of this story. We're looking back now with the lens of nostalgia. Which I think is really interesting in context of this movie because this movie also plays a lot with nostalgia. If you remember, a lot of it actually doesn't take place in the 1940s. A lot of it takes place, beginning in 1919 and into the 20s, 30s, and so forth. One of the reasons why It's a Wonderful Life taps into some of this nostalgia is because in 1946, this movie is essentially a wartime film. And World War II is a moment when a lot of the Christmas media that's being put out, so films and songs, are heavily reliant on nostalgia because they're looking back to a simpler time, to the pre-war days. I mean, if we actually, do go back to the song White Christmas, which was written in 1942, it begins, I'm dreaming of a white Christmas, just like the ones I used to know. So people are looking at this time for some kind of escape back into the past, when the world was just better, the world was just simpler. Which means that the movie already has a nostalgia for pre-war days. By 1974 and onward, there's nostalgia for the 1940s, which of course means that there's just nostalgia everywhere with this film. So this is part of the reason why it is so successful, is that you can't get away from that feeling of like the good old days of Christmas past, of a small town, Norman Rockwell, Americana town, where, maybe the business moguls are trying to, ruin everyone's day, but by the very end of it, they learn that the true meaning of Christmas is being with the ones you love. I don't know if that sounds familiar. Love them or hate them, you have to admit that Hallmark movies do have a pretty decent ancestor in It's a Wonderful Life, which did kind of create the myth of the American Christmas. So, we have a couple options. We're at 20 minutes now that I have been talking to you, and I don't want to exhaust you, as there is another part of the evening that we'll still need to sit through. So we do have two options. We can either jump to intermission right now, you can get up, take a break, stretch your legs, ask questions, get some Christmas cookies in the back, or we can do one more era, which is the post-war family Christmas. I'm fine doing with either way. The red present, the one on the left, will take us to intermission. The green present will take us to a post-war family Christmas. All in favor of the red present? All in favor of the green? Oh! Okay. So, you know the drill. One last time. Well, the green, okay?
John Lennon.
Who wrote
Happy Christmas. Well done.
Oh, he did, yes.
So good. Ending on a really strong note there. All right. What do we want to do?
The Grinch.
I was hoping you'd see that because that's not what we did yesterday. Okay. We actually did both of these. Because during intermission, someone wanted to do a Charlie Brown Christmas. So we did. Okay. Don't get any ideas, actually. All right. So, How the Grinch Stole Christmas, 1966. So recently, culture has been really fascinated by origin stories of green characters. So I thought I would do today telling you a little bit about how the Grinch came to be green. Because fun fact, in the original story, 1957, I think he was not green. He's just white. And he doesn't become green until 1966 when the animated half-hour television special is produced. And green was the color that the animator Chuck Jones went with because he had been using a rental car that was the same future green, and he thought, this is the Grinch. This is the perfect Grinch color. So that's how he came to be green. But how did he come to be the main character in an animated special in the first place? So, Theodore Giesel, Dr. Seuss did not think the Grinch deserved a chance to fly, actually. He had some bad experiences with Hollywood before, and so he was like, no, no one gets to touch my things anymore. The Grinch will not be starring in a special. But the only reason that he eventually conceded to this was because he and Chuck Jones during World War II had worked on these animated shorts together. Private Snafu, I think is his name, and they were just army safety videos. So he does agree to have the Grinch animated. But there's still some difficulties ahead because during this time, if you wanted to produce an animated special, you needed a sponsor. For Charlie Brown, it was Coca-Cola. But for the Grinch, no one was really taking it up. And so Chuck Jones had to go around and ask a lot of different businesses and things if they would sponsor the Grinch. And eventually, Foundation for Commercial Banks did, which Chuck Jones thought was a little bit weird. He said, I thought it was very odd because one of the great lines in there is that the Grinch says, perhaps Christmas doesn't come from a store. I never thought of the baker endorsing that kind of line, but they overlooked it, so we went ahead and made the picture. So, the Grinch is made. Here we have some nice little animated panels and photos from the production, which is aired on December 18th, 1966, to great success, and the rest is history. And one of the parts of the kind of shows of this featured success is just how many times it's been kind of spoofed or reproduced. There were actually in the 1970s and 1980s sequels that were made for television for the Grinch. And then of course there's the Jim Carrey film and then the animated one that came out just a few years ago. So there we go. There is the story of how the Grinch came to steal Christmas. Yes?
What did Hollywood do to Dr. Seuss that he was so mad about?
I'm not at liberty to say.
Okay.
I don't know. That's fair. Alright. Well, great. So, welcome everyone now to intermission. Welcome back everyone to this thing. Alright. So I know as you're sitting down, there's something not sitting quite right with you. You're thinking to yourself, but wait, Charity, what about this major oversight? What about this major omission? Because yes, as great as all of those Christmas stories are, what about Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol? Is that not the greatest Christmas story of the modern age? To which I respond, yes, which is why we're going to spend the entire second half talking about A Christmas Carol. So, basically what happens is Charles Dickens, this is the year 1843, he's looking around and he's noticing that the condition of England is not quite what it should be to his standard. You know anything about English history, you'll know that the 1840s are referred to as the Hungry 40s, because this is when industrialization was just starting to take off. And so there weren't a lot of regulations within factories and things, and so the living and working conditions of the poor were just getting worse and worse. You know, the poor were getting poorer, the rich getting richer. So what Dickens does is he decides, I'm going to do something about this. If no one else is going to do something about this, then I will. And so he decides that he's going to write an essay, convincing people that they need to be more mindful of the poor, and that he eventually scraps this idea, because he thinks, no, an essay is not going to do it. An essay isn't going to pack the punch that I would want it to. I want the force of 20,000 sledgehammers, is the phrase that he uses. So after giving a talk in the industrial city of Manchester about treating your employees better, just general charity toward the poor, he comes back and he begins writing A Christmas Carol. This is in October of 1843. He completes A Christmas Carol in 6 weeks, which is a feat unto itself. But you also need to remember that he's writing Martin Chuzzlewit at the same time. So it's just insane that he does what he does. But that's just Dickens for you. And so, December 19th, 1843, A Christmas Carol hits the shelves. It's an instant success. It sells out 60,000 copies in 5 days, and the people are just chanting more. It's done in this beautiful red cloth gilt binding, which was a little bit more expensive to produce, but Dickens insisted that it be a beautiful but cheap copy so that everyone could enjoy it, or as many people could enjoy it as possible. So we actually didn't make much of a profit off of this book. So there we go. There's the origin story of A Christmas Carol in a nutshell. And I do want to talk a little bit more about this book, but I want to talk about one particular copy of this book, and that is this one. Anyone know or perhaps remember what this is?
Talked about this last year. He would recite the story, and this was his copy that he used of like what lines he was going to recite.
Yes,
How
exactly.
do you say that?
Yeah, so like during this part, for instance, he's supposed to say it weird. Yeah, so the New York Public Library has the scans of these. I mean, he's scribbling parts out, he's adding words in, he's giving himself little notes like that, and in 1853, he performs the first reading, and eventually he got to the point where he had the entire thing memorized, which took about 2-3 hours to do, and he does these periodically until the end of his life in 1870. Part of the reason why he dies in 1870, from the age of, I think it's 59, late 50s, is because these readings are so intense that they actually shorten his life. He just goes at them too hard. He exhausts himself. But the people love them. This is a print, I think it's from an American magazine, the Rush for Dickens tickets. This is kind of like the Dickens, or the Ticketmaster of the 1850s and 60s. If you know, familiar with like Beatlemania or just Swifties at all, you might kind of know what this is like. Here's another print from Harper's Weekly, 1868, of all the different kinds of people that you might see at a Charles Dickens reading. And I want you to just take a second, choose the one that speaks most to you, and really let it kind of seep in, get into that headspace, because you are now at a Charles Dickens reading. Welcome to a Christmas Carol reading tour. Pick any of these dates. Imagine that you're in it, because these are all the dates that Dickens read A Christmas Carol. And ladies and gentlemen, may I introduce to you me, Charles Dickens. So, what would happen is when Dickens would walk out onto the stage, he'd have his book under his arm and his head down as uproarious applause ensues, and end of the sentence, "Ladies and gentlemen," silent for a moment, "I have the pleasure of reading to you first tonight A Christmas Carol in 4 staves, stave 1. So, before we get into what we're about to do, I want to say that what's about to happen is based off of readings or reading through the New York Public Library Dickens book, looking at contemporary reviews, looking at biographies to try to recreate as close as a 21st century American woman can Dickens readings accurately. That last bit in the Dickens voice is the only time you'll hear the Dickens voice tonight because it drives me crazy otherwise. But, as the man says, stave 1. Marley was dead, to begin with. There's no doubt whatever about that. The register, his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourner. Scrooge signed it. And Scrooge's name was good upon change for anything he chose to put his hand to. Old Marley was dead as a doornail. Scrooge knew he was dead? Of course he did. How could it be otherwise? Scrooge and he were partners for I don't know how many years. Scrooge was his sole executor, his sole administrator, his sole assign, his sole residuary legatee, his sole friend, his sole mourner. Scrooge never painted out old Marley's name. There it yet stood. Years afterwards, above the warehouse door, Scrooge and Marley. The firm was known as Scrooge and Marley. Sometimes people new to the business called Scrooge, sometimes Marley. He answered to both names. It was all the same to him. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, Scrooge. A squeezing, wrenching, grasping, clutching, covetous old sinner. Nobody ever stopped him in the street to say with gladsome looks, "My dear Scrooge, how are you? When do you come to see me?" No beggars implored him to bestow a trifle. No children asked him what was o'clock. No man or woman ever once in his life inquired the way to such and such a place as Scrooge. Even the blind men's dogs appeared to know him. And when they saw him coming on, would tug their owners into doorways and up courts, and then would wag their tails as though they said, "No eye at all is better than an evil eye, dark master." But what did Scrooge care? It was the very thing he liked, to edge his way along the crowded paths of life, warning all human sympathy to keep its distance, was what the knowing ones called nuts to Scrooge. Once upon a time, of all the good days in the year, upon a Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat busy in his counting house. It was a cold, bleak, biting weather, and the city clocks had only just gone 3, but it was quite dark already. The door of Scrooge's counting house was open, that he might keep his eye upon the clerk, who, in a dismal little cell beyond, a sort of tank, was copying letters. Scrooge had a very small fire, but the clerk's fire was so very much smaller that it looked like one coal. But he couldn't replenish it, for Scrooge kept the coal box in his own room, and so surely as the clerk came in with the shovel, the master predicted that it would be necessary for them to part. Wherefore, the clerk put on his white comforter, tried to warm himself with a candle, in which effort, not being a man of strong imagination, he decidedly failed. "A Merry Christmas, Uncle! God save you!" cried a cheerful voice. It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew, who came upon him so quickly that this was the first intimation Scrooge had of his approach. "Bah!" said Scrooge. "Humbug!" "Christmas a humbug, Uncle," said Scrooge's nephew. "You don't mean that, I'm sure." "I do. Out upon Merry Christmas. What's Christmas time to you but time for paying bills without money, time for finding yourself a year older but not an hour richer, time for balancing your books, and having every item in them through a round dozen of months presented dead against you? If I had my will, every idiot who goes about with a Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled with his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart. He should." Okay, we now jump forward. Scrooge has bullied several people by this point. He is now back in his cold, dark house, tucking in for a bit of gruel. As he threw his head back in the chair, his glance happened to rest upon a bell, a disused bell, that hung in the room and communicated for some purpose now forgotten, with a chamber in the highest story of the building. It was with great astonishment and with strange, inexplicable dread that as he looked, he saw the bell begin to swing. Soon it rang out loudly, and so did every bell in the house. This was succeeded by a clinking noise deep down below, as if some person were dragging a heavy chain over the casks in the wine-merchant cellar. Then he heard a noise much louder on the floors below, then coming up the stairs and coming straight towards the door. It came on through the heavy door, and a spectre passed into the room before his eyes. And upon coming in, the dying flame leaped up as though it cried, "I know him, Marley's ghost!" And that's when all the Victorians in the audience went, "Ah!" So the two now begin to talk, but undoubtedly the best part of the exchange is the bit when Scrooge accuses Marley of being indigested. "You might be an undigested bit of beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of underdone potato. There is more of gravy than grave about you, whatever you are." Anyway, so Marley's thesis statement is, "I am here to warn you that you have yet a chance and hope of escaping my fate, a chance and hope of my procuring Ebenezer. You were always a good friend to me, thank ye. You will be haunted by 3 spirits." "Is that the chance and hope you mentioned, Jacob? I think I'd rather not. Without their visits, you cannot hope to shun the path I tread. Expect the first tomorrow when the bell tolls 1. Expect the second on the next night at the same hour. The third on the next night when the last stroke of 12 has ceased to vibrate. Look to see me no more, and look that, for your own sake, remember what has passed between us." Okay, so now I'm going to jump to the first spirit's visit. This is the ghost of Christmas past. So they visited a few scenes from Scrooge's boyhood, and we see him now as an apprentice to Fezziwig the moneylender, who has just ordered on Christmas Eve that the office be cleared away for a ball. Clear away! There was nothing they couldn't have cleared away, or couldn't have cleared away, with old Fezziwig looking on. It was done in a minute. Every movable was packed up as if it were dismissed from public life forevermore. The floor was swept and watered, the lamps were trimmed, fuel was heaped upon the fire, and the warehouse was as snug and warm and dry and bright a ballroom as you could desire to see upon a winter's night. In came the fiddler with the music book, and went up to the lofty desk and made an orchestra of it, and tuned like 50 stomach aches. In came Mrs. Fezziwig, one vast, substantial smile. In came the 3 Miss Fezziwigs, beaming and lovable. In came the 10 young followers whose hearts they broke. In came all the young men and women employed in the business. In came the housemaid with her cousin the baker. In came the cook with her brother's particular friend the milkman. In they all came, one after another, some shyly, some boldly, some gracefully, some awkwardly, some pushing, some pulling. In they all came anyhow and everyhow. Away they all went, 20 couple at once, hands half round and back again the other way, down the middle and up again, round in various stages of affectionate grouping, old top couple always turning up in the wrong place, new couple starting off again, as soon as they got there. All couples at last, and not a bottom one to help them. When this result was brought about, old Fezziwig, clapping his hands to stop the dance, cried out, "Well done!" And the fiddler plunged his face in a pot of porter, especially provided for that purpose. There were more dances, and there were forfeits, and more dances, and there was cake, and there was negus, and there was a great piece of cold roast, and there was a great piece of cold boiled, and there were mince pies, and plenty of beer. But the great effect of the evening came after the roast and boiled, when the fiddler struck up Sir Roger de Coverley. Then old Fezziwig stood out to dance with Mrs. Fezziwig. Top couple too, with a good stiff piece of work cut out for them. 3 or 4 and 20 pair of partners, people who were not to be trifled with, people who would dance and had no notion of walking. But if they had been twice as many, 4 times, old Fezziwig would have been a match for them, and so would Mrs. Fezziwig. As for her, she was as worthy to be his partner in every sense of the term. Positive light appeared to issue from Fezziwig's calves. They shone in every part of the dance. You couldn't have predicted at any given time what would have become of them next. And when old Fezziwig and Mrs. Fezziwig had gone through the dance, advance and retire, turn to your partner, bow and curtsy, corkscrew, thread the needle, then back again to your place, Fezziwig cut so deftly that he appeared to wink with his legs. And that was the biggest hit of the evening. All the Victorians went, ha 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 ha. That was so reserved and suppressed like Victorians are. So thank you for the accuracy. Scrooge is now caught in a thoughtful moment. He felt the spirit's glance and stopped. What is the matter? Nothing particular. Something, I think. No. I should like to be able to say a word to my clock just now. That's all. His former self turned down the lamps, and he gave utterance to the wish. and Scrooge and the ghost again stood side by side in the open air. "My time grows short," observed the spirit. "Quick!" Okay, so now we're going to jump forward to the ghost of Christmas presents visit. Scrooge and the spirit are now witnessing the Cratchit family dinner, and Dickens would at this moment taste all of the food, and the Victorians just thought it was the most charming thing. At last the dinner was done. The cloth was cleared, the hearth swept, and the fire made up. The compound in the jug being tasted and considered perfect, apples and oranges were put upon the table, and a shovel full of chestnuts on the fire. Then all the Cratchit family drew around the hearth in what Bob Cratchit called a circle, and at Bob Cratchit's elbow stood the family display of glass, 2 broken tumblers, and a cracked custard cup without a handle. These held the hot stuff from the jug, however, as well as Goldie Roberts would have done, and Bob served it out with beaming looks. And when the chestnuts on the fire sputtered and crackled noisily, then Bob proposed, and yet it was, "A Merry Christmas, my dear, God bless us," which all the family re-echoed.
God bless us, everyone,
said Tiny Tim, the last of all. He sat very close to his father's side upon the little stool. Bob held his withered little hand in his as if he loved the child, and wished to keep him by his side, and dreaded that he might be taken from him. Scrooge raised his head speedily, on hearing his own name. "Mr. Scrooge," said Bob, "I'll give you Mr. Scrooge, the founder of this feast."
The founder of this feast, indeed,
cried Mrs. Cratchit, reddening. "I wish I had an ear. I'd give them a piece of my mind to feast upon, and I hope you have a good appetite for it." "My dear," said Bob, "the children. Christmas Day." "It should be Christmas Day, I am sure," said she, "on which one drinks the health of such an odious, stingy, odd, unfeeling man as Mr. Scrooge. You know he is, Robert. Nobody knows it better than you do, poor fellow." "My dear," was Bob's mild answer, "Christmas Day." "I'll drink his health for your sake and the day's," said Mrs. Cratchit, "not for his. Long life to him, a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Be very merry and very happy, I have no doubt." The children drank the toast after her. It was the first of their proceedings which had no heartiness. Tiny Tim drank it last of all, but he didn't care a tuppence for it. Scrooge was the ogre of the family. The mention of his name cast a dark shadow on the party, which was not dispelled for a full 5 minutes. Right, so now we're going to skip forward to the ghost of Christmas yet to come. Scrooge has just stood before a lonely, plundered corpse, his own, although he doesn't realize it, and has witnessed a heart-wrenching scene of grief at the Cratchit house as they mourn the death of Tiny Tim. The ghost of Christmas yet to come conveyed him to a dismal, wretched, ruinous churchyard. The spirit stood among the graves and pointed down to one.
Before I draw nearer to that stone at which you point, answer me one question. Are these the shadows of the things that will be, or are they the shadows of things that may be only?
Still the ghost pointed downward to the grave by which it stood.
Men's corpses will foreshadow to certain ends, to which, if persevered in, they must lead. But if the corpses be departed from, the ends will change. Say, it is thus with what you have shown me.
The spirit was as immovable as ever. Scrooge crept towards it, trembling as he went, and following the finger read upon the stone of the neglected grave his own name, Ebenezer Scrooge.
Am I the man that lay upon the bed? No, spirit, no, spirit. Hear me, I am not the man I was. I will not be the man I must have been before this intercourse. Why, show me this if I am past all hope. Assure me that I may yet change these shadows you have shown me by an altered life. The kind hand faltered. I will honour Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all the year. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. I will not shut out the lessons that they teach. Oh, tell me that I may sponge away the writing on this stone.
Holding up his hands in a last prayer to have his fate reversed, he saw an alteration in the phantom suit and dress. It shrunk, collapsed, and dwindled down into a bedpost. Yes, and the bedpost was his own. The bed was his own, the room was his own, best and happiest of all, the time before his own, to make amends in. He was checked in his transports by the churches ringing out in the lustiest peals he had ever heard. Running to the window, he opened it and put out his head. No fog, no mist, no night, clear, bright, stirring, golden day.
What's today?
cried Scrooge, calling downward to a boy in Sunday clothes, who perhaps had loitered to look about him.
Huh? What's today, my fine fellow? Today? Why, it's Christmas Day. Christmas Day? I haven't missed it. Hello, my fine fellow. Hello. Do you know the poulterers? In the next street but one, at the corner? I should hope I did. An intelligent boy, a remarkable boy. Do you know whether they've sold the prize turkey that was hanging up there? Not that little prize turkey, the big one. What? One as big as me? What a delightful boy. It's a pleasure to talk to him. Yes, my lord. It's hanging there now. Is it? Go and buy it. What? No, I am in earnest. Go and buy it. And tell them to bring it here, as I may give them the direction where to take it. Come back with the man, and I'll give you a shilling. Come back with him in less than 5 minutes, and I'll give you a half-crown. The boy was off like a shot. I'll send it to Bob Cratchit. He shall know who sends it. It's twice the size of Tiny Tim. This is now at the office the next morning. But he was early at the office the next morning. Oh, he was early there. If he could only be there first and catch Bob Cratchit coming in late, that was the thing he had set his heart upon. And he did it. The clock struck 9, no Bob. A quarter past, no Bob. Bob was a full 18 minutes and a half behind his time. Bob's hat was off before he opened the door. His comforter, too. He was on his stool in a jiffy, driving away with his pen as if he were trying to overtake 9 o'clock. Hello, growled Scrooge in his accustomed voice, as near he could as to feign it. What do you mean by coming in here at this time of day? I'm very sorry, sir. I am behind my time. You are? Yes, I think you are. Step this way, sir, if you please. It's only once a year, sir. It shall not be repeated. I was making rather merry yesterday, sir. No, I'll tell you what, my friend. Sorry. I don't understand this sort of thing any longer. And therefore, Scrooge continued, leaping from his stool and giving Bob such a dig in the waistcoat that he staggered back into the tank again, and therefore I am about to raise your salary. Bob trembled and got a little nearer the ruler. A Merry Christmas, Bob, said Scrooge with an earnestness that could not be mistaken, as he clapped him on the back. A Merry Christmas, Bob, my good fellows, and I have given you for many a year. I'll raise your salary and endeavor to assist your struggling family, and we will discuss your affairs this very afternoon over a Christmas bowl of smoking bishop, Bob. Make up the files, and buy a second cold stubble before you dot another I, Bob Cratchit. Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all, and infinitely more. And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. He became as good a friend, as good a master, and as good a man as the good old city knew, or any other good old city, town, or borough in the good old world. Some people laughed to see the alteration in him, but his own heart laughed, and that was quite enough for him. He had no further intercourse with the spirits, but lived in that respect upon the total abstinence principle ever afterwards. And it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well, if any man alive possessed that knowledge. May that be truly said of us, and all of us. And so, as Tiny Tim observed, God bless us, every one. And at the very end of his final performance, he told the crowd, "From these garish lights I vanish now forever," and disappeared, never to be seen in public again. And there you have it. Thank you very much. Our next one, which will be kind of like this style sort of thing. I'm going to take this off, it's over. It's January 18th. It will be January in celebration of Jane Austen, who will be turning 250 in December of 2025, or she would if she weren't dead already. So we'll be doing some fun kind of show and tell stories about Jane Austen with some of her first editions. On January 25th, the Artifacts Book Club is meeting to discuss The Secret Garden. And then sometime like January or early February, we'll be doing a jazz night in the gallery. If you want to keep posted about these events, you can follow us on Instagram or Facebook there. But before we
and completely. I'll say one last time, if you've been to one of our events before, you'll know that we have surveys at the end, and they're really helpful for us to know the ways that we can improve these kinds of events, the kinds of things that you might be interested in seeing in the future. Because otherwise we just keep doing the same thing over and over again, and that can get boring, maybe, I don't know. So if you don't mind doing that, that would be fantastic. Other than that, I have nothing else for you, except for the age-old tradition that we now have, or at least have had since June, and that is, ladies and gentlemen, Trouser Fair. Yeah, feel free to get more cookies in the back. Complete the survey. If you want to come see A Christmas Carol in its first edition up here, you can do that. And yes, thank you so much. Oh yeah, no, you probably like that. So, which road do we want to go down?
Hoffmann.
Okay, let's do it. So, welcome everyone to the Nutcracker and the Mouse King. Let me just introduce you very quickly to a moment in time. Let the kind of foreboding, dark sense begin to seep into your bones, because we're going to talk about a little piece of German Romanticism. We're going to talk specifically about, welcome, seat. We're going to talk specifically about this fellow here, Prince Theodor Wilhelm, later Amadeus, because he was a Mozart fangirl, Hoffmann. And in 1816, he wrote a story, The Nutcracker and the Mouse King. And as you may have guessed, I don't speak German, so I'm not going to try to pronounce it. But like a lot of fairy tales from this time, think Grimm Brothers. There's kind of a darkness, kind of an edginess to this story that you might not expect. For instance, this is my favorite line from the thing. This is the Nutcracker speaking to the girl Marie. You alone, dear lady, gave me the courage and strength to fight the insolent varlet who dared to defy you. The treacherous king of the mice has been vanquished and lies writhing in his blood. And so this kind of image that we get from the ballet, this kind of fun, bright, sparkly time with really nice candy themed people. It does happen in the story, but it happens very briefly. It's just a couple pages long. And when it does happen, it is really nice. And we have this little description. Soon she was surrounded by sweet smells given off the woods on either side of the path. Glittering lights in the dark foliage proved to be gold and silver fruits hanging from stems of many different colors. So it is nice, and it is like, oh, when it happens. But there's a lot of the story in the ballet that's just completely taken out. One of them, and a big chunk of the original Hoffmann story, is this story within the story, where Drosselmeyer tells Marie the backstory of the Nutcracker, how this prince came to be a Nutcracker, and it's called The Tale of the Hard Nut. And it's weird. And you can just kind of trust me on that. We're not going to spend tons of time on it. I mean, this is the only time we're going to spend on it. It's weird. If you want to talk about it after, we can. So if like a whole chunk of the Hoffmann story is dedicated to something we never see in the ballet, and half of the ballet is dedicated to something that we only get for a couple pages, how did this come to be? I can see you're all asking that. Fortunately, I have some slides to answer. So let's begin. Let's fast forward, jump from 1816 to 1844, when this French gentleman here, Alexandre Dumas, of Count of Monte Cristo and what's the other one, Three Musketeer fame and other things, decided that he would not just translate the Nutcracker story, but actually rewrite it and soften a lot of its edges. And it was this version of the story that was taken up by this fellow, Ivan Alexander who was the director of the Imperial Theaters in St. Petersburg, got together with his friend Marius, who was the best choreographer in all the land. And he was like, "Okay, Marius, remember that time last year when we did a production of Sleeping Beauty and it was gorgeous and it was lavish and it was such a spectacle? Let's do something like that again. And let's do it with the Dumas Nutcracker story. But we'll just focus on the kind of land of the sweet stuff because that's the most sparkly bit." And Marius is like, "Yeah, let's do it, but who should we get to write the music?" And they go, well, remember that one time last year when we did Sleeping Beauty? And that guy, that composer guy, just knew how to bring drama to the table. Let's hire him back." And so in comes Tchaikovsky. I just really love smuggling, so you have to bear with me. So essentially what we get is a long historical game of telephone with this Prussian writer, Hoffmann, writing a story in 1816. In the 1840s, a French writer, Dumas, coming along and kind of revamping it, and then a Russian composer rewriting it through music in the 1890s. That isn't to say that Hoffmann's influence hasn't had moments of revival. In the 80s, Maurice Sendak, who wrote and illustrated Where the Wild Things Are, was asked if he would design the sets and the costumes for a production of Nutcracker. Now, it still has the same story of the ballet. It doesn't do the whole Tale of the Nut thing, but it tries to retain the kind of atmosphere of Hoffmann's original tale, which I think it does. Look how creepy that is. And then just a few years ago, the Royal Scottish National Orchestra did this thing where they got Alan Cumming, the actor, to read Hoffmann's original text while the orchestra was playing Tchaikovsky's score, which I think is great because Hoffmann's story is cool, Hoffmann's story is good, but also Tchaikovsky's music is just phenomenal. And so to marry the two together, I think is just an excellent thing. So there we go. There we have the story and the backstory and the after story of the Nutcracker. Let us move on to the next era. What's that? I guess I forgot to animate these. What's that?
The Nutcracker.
That was. What's that?
Nutcracker.
Okay, good. Does anyone want to venture a guess as to what?
Oh, is that Gift of the Magi?
Yes. Well done. Well done. So which one do we want to talk about? Nutcracker Ballet or Gift of the Magi?
Magi.
Good one. Okay. All right. So, Gift of the Magi. It's first written in 1905, December, fittingly, but is later published as a book in the short story collection of 4 Million in 1906. Actually, on my birthday, April 10th, 1906. So it's written, it happens, and as soon as it is, it starts to just be picked up for adaptation. This was, just a few years later, a silent film version of The Gift of the Magi, and then in successive decades you see that again and again and again and again and again, the story is taken and adapted. One reason that The Gift of the Magi has been adapted so many times is that it's easy, it's formulaic. So welcome class to Math Gi 101. We're going to explain how this works. So basically all you need to do to adapt a gift of the Magi is to have character A sell something valuable so that they can gain a gift for character B. Character B does the same thing. Are we following along so far? Great. One of the issues, though, is that the value of these gifts is ultimately nothing because they kind of cancel each other out. Like in the original story, the husband he sells his pocket watch to buy a comb for his wife sells her hair to buy a chain for his pocket watch, and so you see they're left with useless gifts. As we can see, they're left with nothing, the both of them. But another thing to remember is that another hoped for outcome in selling the valuable possessions to get a gift for the other person is to make the other person happy. And you might be able to tell by this point that I actually don't really know how to do math very well. And so basically in the end we just get them being happy because they made sacrifices for each other, and that's a great gift. So on a technical scale, that's why Gift of the Magi has been adapted so many times, because you really just fill things in. Like, this is Mickey Mouse, that's Minnie Mouse, this is Bert, this is Ernie. Which is actually a really good adaptation of the story. But I want to bring in my friend John Steinbeck to explain kind of why the desire to adapt Gift of the Magi has been so prevalent through the last 100 years.
At the turn of the century, certain social leaders in New York claimed that only 400 people were worth knowing. In disagreement, O. Henry wrote, a volume recalled the 4 million. He thought everybody was worth knowing. Now that only term, 400 is almost forgotten. But from the 4 million, the gift of the Magi is as fresh and alive as the day was written. O. Henry said, the Magi were the wise men, the wonderfully wise men who brought gifts to the babe in the manger. They invented the art of giving Christmas presents. And that invention was still operating when this story begins, in the year of our Lord, 1905.
So, like my friend John Steinbeck said, good old John, the heart of the story, that all here points us to, is that kind of, the most important gift, the real gift in this scenario is not the pocket watch chain or the brush, it's that sacrifice, that manifestation of love, which goes back to the original sacrifice of the Magi, which is the wise men in the Bible. So, there we go, there we have the gift of the Magi. We all have a newfound appreciation for it. So, now, welcome to the middle of the 20th century. This one is maybe a little bit trickier. Does anyone know what this is? I'm looking for a song, not necessarily the movie.
Oh, Christmas tree.
No.
White Christmas.
Yes, well done, well done. Does anyone know what this is?
It's a Wonderful Life.
Good. And then
Miracle on 34th Street.
Okay, well done. That's very, very good. So which avenue do you want to go?
It's a Wonderful Life.
You know, that's so funny because I actually made these all go to It's a Wonderful Life because I want to talk about it. So let's begin. Let's talk a little bit more about stars. Does anyone know what this is? Yeah, triangle and.
The reader?
You guys are so good at this. I'm bad at constellations too, so it's okay. This is Capricorn. Now, why might I be showing you the constellation Capricorn? Well, it's because when It's a Wonderful Life was released in 1946, it was dubbed by a lot of people Capricorn. This was because it was directed by Frank Capra and they thought it was corny. Frank Capra didn't agree. He thought that It's a Wonderful Life really encapsulated his philosophy of filmmaking, which is, championing the individual, protesting any degradation of his dignity, etc. Unfortunately, not a lot of people agreed. The film was a flop. There were just mixed negative reviews. And the main complaint was the Capricorn one, that it was too sentimental. It was too sentimental to be realistic. Another complaint, interestingly, was that it villainized capitalists a little too much. And so the FBI actually issued a memo in 1947 proclaiming that It's a Wonderful Life is communist propaganda. Let's just think about that for a second. I don't buy into this, but I will take this moment to say that there are some striking similarities between these two figures here. And we're just gonna let you think about that, because we're gonna move on to the year 1974. 1974 is kind of one of the saddest, but also most fortuitous moments in the history of It's a Wonderful Life. Because what happened was, on the day that It's a Wonderful Life's copyright was supposed to be renewed, someone just forgot to do it. Like, it just rolled by and didn't cross anyone's mind. And so, when no one remembered to renew the copyright, television networks were looking at this movie and they were going, great, some Christmas thing that we can just air for free. And then suddenly, on all of these channels, everywhere, all the time, you're just getting It's a Wonderful Life over and over and over again. So it's saturating this culture, and this is when it becomes a Christmas classic. But another thing I think that's worth noting about 1974 is that by this point, we're 30 years removed from the original story, and so audiences in 1974 and on can now work with a level of nostalgia for this period that the original audience couldn't, which is interesting because It's a Wonderful Life is already a very nostalgic film. I mean, actually remember, most of it doesn't take place in the 1940s. Most of it is flashbacks before the moment that George Bailey's on the bridge. And this is pretty common in a lot of media that came out during wartime, because this is a moment in time where it's just upheaval for like everyone. And so during Christmas, this is when people start to look to the pre-war Christmas as the ideal Christmas, the idyllic Christmas. When we get songs in 1942, like White Christmas, which, if you remember, they're dreaming of a white Christmas just like the ones I used to know, the ones before the war kind of ruined everything. 1942 was also the first Christmas that the United States mobilized during the war, so this really hit, and this is why this became like the best-selling single of all time for a long time after that. So basically, It's a Wonderful Life already has nostalgia built into it for the pre-war days, that kind of Edwardian ideal. But by 1974 and onward, we have nostalgia now for the 1940s period that it was made. And so we just get nostalgia everywhere with this movie. And this kind of creates the myth of the American Christmas. What Christmas is all about is being in small town Americana, Norman Rockwell, Winter Wonderland, where big business moguls might be trying to ruin your day, but at the very end of it, you know that the true meaning of Christmas is about being with the people you love. I don't know if that sounds familiar to you, but this is a model that has been used again and again and again and again, and it comes from partially It's a Wonderful Life. So if you hate Hallmark movies, it has a decent ancestor at least. So, by this point, we have a couple options because I have talked a little bit longer than I planned to. And so we have two different avenues we can go down. This is the red present, this is the green present. So the red present, if we go there, then we just jump to intermission, jump to our little break, where we kind of resituate ourselves for the next section of tonight. If we go the green present, then we'll do one more era, a post-war family Christmas before intermission. I really don't mind either way, so it's whatever people want to do. So if you want to do red present, so just breaking now, raise your hand. Green. Green?
Talk more.
Aww. Non-committal people?
I'm colorblind, so
Okay, great. Let's go to the post-war family Christmas. What's this one?
The Grinch. Charlie Brown.
Well done. What's this one?
That's Grinch.
Well done. What's that one?
John Lennon.
Right on. Right on.
It's over, this is Christmas. Or is it Happy Christmas, War is over? War is over.
Is that one? Should we do that one?
Yes.
Okay, let's do it. I hoped someone would say that because I do really love the Beatles. Okay, anyway, so Happy Christmas, War is over. So, it's supposed to be playing right now, but it isn't, so we'll just jump to what war he's talking about. So, John Lennon writes Happy Christmas, War is over in 1971. We notice the dates here, that's in the thick of the Vietnam War, but kind of towards the end of it, when we've had a lot of protests by this point. People are done. People are so done with this war. They are over this war. And in 1969, a couple of years before the song was released, we actually get a series of peace protests that John and his wife Yoko engage in, where they have "War is over, if you want it, Happy Christmas" from John and Yoko plastered, everywhere. They've got signs, they've got billboards. And one reason why he kind of returns to this and turns it into a song is when he released Imagine earlier that year, 1971. It was enormously successful, and he realized that its success was, as he said, it's a political message put across with a little bit of honey. And a Christmas song is the perfect kind of honey for a political message, at least in John Lennon's mind, because it's already a sweet thing. And so if you deliver this kind of nice nostalgic song, that also at the same time says, please stop warring, then people might listen a little bit more. And so in October 1971, he records it. It's released in December 1971 in the US. It's delayed in the UK just because of some rights things. He gets the Harlem Community Choir to sing the background. If you've ever wondered what that like nice but semi-screeching thing is, that's what it is. It's not immediately successful. Part of this is because it's released too late in the year for it to really gain traction by the time Christmas comes along. But in December of 1980 was when this song really became big, when it finally reached number 1. Does anyone know why that might have been? Yeah, he was killed on December 8th, 1980, and since then, this has kind of been a part of his legacy, that sort of martyrdom that he stands for a lot of people. And I mean, we've seen a lot of different artists have covered this song in the decades since. So we have, but another part of the legacy of this song that I don't think is talked enough about, and I really hope this next section works, there have been a couple technical issues, is that it is just one piece of the Beatles' Christmas music moment. Starting in 1967 with this banger, Christmas Time Spirit. And of course we have George contributing this piece in 1974. So good. Actually recorded in July. And then whatever this even was. I wanna ride in the snake. So there we go. We have our post-war family Christmas, and now it is time to break.